Thanks for the introduction there, Christian. As Christian mentioned, I'm Patrick Osterhaus, President and CTO of Protera Technologies. And for about the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about this subject, running SAP on AWS to drive efficiency gains and cost savings. So appreciate your time. We'll put a lot of information in here, and feel free to ask questions as content comes up you have a question about. We can try to address them then, as well as at the end when we have a formal Q&A session. So this is the agenda we're going to talk about today. As Christian mentioned, we're going to look at the SAP applications which are now supported by AWS. And then we're going to look at how we can deploy SAP onto the AWS infrastructure. We'll look at how you can get to SAP on the cloud through some migration scenarios. And then we'll also look at the typical use cases that we've seen for running SAP on AWS. And then finally, we'll look at the efficiency gains. And I think this is where the most information we're going to have on this webinar, what we've seen over the last 5 years being a partner of AWS. Where's the biggest bang for you to put your compute into AWS and what you can expect to gain from that. So I think that's a lot of information packed in that section. And lastly, we're going to finish off with probably the most important part, and that's the people that have actually reaped those gains and what have they done, how they made their operations better and more cost efficient running on AWS. So let's get into it. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes just to give you a little context about Protera. Just think it's a nice preface to describe how we started working with AWS and the capabilities that we bring to the table, why we've earned the right here to talk about the subject. So we started business in 1998. We're coming up on our 18th anniversary. We started life as a professional services company around SAP, around the SAP technical space, around basis. And we've, over the last years, have branched out to many areas around the SAP solution. As you can see on the right side, we have 5 certifications from SAP. These are global certifications. We're one of the few companies in the world to have all these 5. And you can see as SAP has continued to enhance their solution and their offerings, we've continued to stay in sync with them and get the newest certifications. So the latest one that we got a couple years ago is around the SAP HANA operations. So we're staying very close and tied with where SAP is going, as well as the industry as a whole. You can also see that we have a partnership with SUSE for the OS, and SUSE has a very tight integration with HANA and all the technology SAP is building. So we value that partnership greatly, as well as our partnership with SAP Competency for AWS. And we were as part of the original certification process with SAP and AWS back in 2011. So we've been working hand in hand with AWS for many, many years, and seeing the amazing growth and the potential in the product continue to improve every day. What the middle graphic here is representing is we like to see our services represented as a cloud broker. And we like to see anything that SAP is providing as a service, how can we best enable that to our customers through the cloud? We provide that through a management platform we call AppCare. That AppCare solution provides the 24/7 monitoring, as well as all the upgrades, migration, security implementation, all the support, and this could be through the full stack. So this includes the cloud services within AWS, extending it to the application services in SAP, all the way to the networking to get it to the front end, and even managing those desktops at a customer site. So we can do the whole CIO, they call it CIO in a box, the full IT outsourcing we focus upon with the SAP customer space. You've seen these, with Run SAP for many years, the design, deploy, and run. We've been focusing upon architecture sizing. That's something that we can help a customer right from the beginning if they're looking at SAP, sizing a new environment, as well as looking at an environment that's running on-premise and resizing that to go to cloud. So we're involved with proof of concepts, the sizing of those, to the deployment where it involves the migration, the implementation, testing, and making sure the solution is production ready, and then going live with it and supporting it post go live with the optimization services, setting up any HA and DR, the backups, the monitoring, all that. And again, 24/7 help desk wraps around those services with an SLA on a monthly subscription. So let's jump into the content here. So this has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. Every quarter, it seems like a new product is offered for support. This is the current, as of today, what SAP services are offered, or solutions are offered and certified by AWS. So you can see here, it's vast majority of the SAP solutions are available on a certified infrastructure for the AWS. And the note provides more information there. And we've seen this where we started working with AWS. Initially, production wasn't certified, so we were working with non-production systems, and then as certifications rolled out, production was certified. Then HANA came out. Now S4 is certified, so we continue to see this build and expand, each quarter with new instance types, which is the next point here, which is very exciting news, which was announced at Sapphire. So about a little over a month ago, we have the X1 instance, which supports up to 2 terabytes in RAM. So the largest workloads now can be supported in AWS for HANA systems, and that's about 131,000 SAP. So it's a very, very large workload that's fully supported in AWS. And we'll see here in a moment, in the next few slides, those instance types and what's fully supported by SAP. There's quite a few options for a customer that's, doesn't need a 2 terabyte HANA system. They can start smaller. We'll talk about that here in the next few minutes. Let's talk before that about the deployment templates. And this is, if a cloud or company's not familiar with cloud and we introduce the service that AWS provides, it's essentially these categories. The infrastructure, as AWS mentions on their websites, broad and deep core cloud infrastructure services. So within that full stack, and it's within every region closest to a company's headquarters, we can provision at a data center very close to them and provide an edge location that's going to provide that content delivery if they have any web services. So you can see here all the reach, the far reach, and deep reach throughout the whole world now. And as you can see, we'll talk about more of these specifically in the next few slides. So we can talk about this one a little more in detail. It's a little easier to see what the coming soons. And this is, I think this is a new way to communicate for AWS, where they're now talking about what's the roadmap. In the past, it's been pretty hush-hush as what was coming soon. Now it looks like it opening up the Komodo a little bit, where it's now you can see Ohio is going to be released this year, as well as Montreal and a few other regions in the Asia Pac and in the UK also. So very good news, continuing to expand the footprint with data centers around the world. So just a little primer on the cloud services. We can think about 4 categories here. 3 of them are represented in this. I guess the third one combines 2 actually. But we have the compute and the storage, which is, well, let's talk about compute first. The compute is the RAM and CPU, and those are the instance types. That's actually what's certified when we talk about a specific type of compute for AWS is talking about the size of RAM and CPU for SAP. So you'll see this X1, which is certified for 2 terabytes. Before that, the largest size was 226. So it was a huge jump in the memory processing capabilities for that instance. And we'll see in the next slide here, what are all the certified options for SAP. There's very, very large selection. Within the storage, there's the EBS volumes. So this is what you could think of as a file system on a Linux system or a drive on a Windows server. Those are going to provide that persistent storage. So this is where your databases are installed. This is where the operating system lives. And one of the amazing capabilities that Amazon has provided over the last, say, 3 years, they started providing provisioned IOPS. So if you have a system that you put into AWS and you're realizing after some time, maybe the system grows or there's a more demanding workload that's put on the system, you can actually increase the IOPS, the capabilities and the speed of the disk that are present on that system. So a lot of capabilities within the storage, as well as the S3, which is the lower tier, very cost-effective solution for storage that they provide for. You could put your backups there, or you could put file systems and store them there. It's a great way to offsite the data very easily and very cost-effectively. And that data is all put across the region, they call, at minimum of 2 to 3 data centers that it's replicated. So highly resilient data storage. And then lastly, and I'll say these are combined into 2, we have the security and what I would also categorize as networking. And that's categorized as the VPC. This is the virtual private connection. This is what's required for all SAP systems, that you can't use their base networking subnetting. You have to use the virtual private connect. And that will let you then connect to the And there's a lot about security. We'll talk a little bit about it later in the presentation. It's a area that's built within the whole solution of AWS. So we have modular, let's say object-based security throughout the whole cloud. And it's a very powerful feature, which we'll talk a little more about. And that's an area that you can provide to SAP systems. As I mentioned, these are the instance sizes. So you can see if you have a customer or a system that's more dependent upon having more memory, you can see on the bottom where the HANA would certainly categorize into this area. You're going to need more memory to the ratio of CPUs. And you can see this is where the X1 fits in. Right now it's 128 virtual CPUs and married with 2 terabytes of RAM against that monstrous rating of 135,000 SAPs. And then for other systems, you may have non-prods or ECC systems that are non-HANA. You could even run these in the general purpose size. And you may have other systems that are more compute heavy, maybe BI, where you're going to need a more ratio of CPUs. So you can see there's a lot of options for how to size a system and how to categorically assign it within the SAP benchmarking and SAP's ratings for how it translates here to AWS. So baseline architecture, we'll talk a little bit about, again, that requirement of the VPC that you need for SAP. It's a base requirement. And there's some options with how a customer could connect to that environment, either through VPN, or we could do a direct connect, which is capable for connecting dedicated bandwidth at a subscribe rate for up and down download speeds. So we have that connection that's connecting from the customer on-premise system to Amazon VPC, which is the networking. And then we can build these availability zones for business continuity. So you have, in this example, we have our production landscape in the region East. Now we would probably want to have DR. We could put that in a different region, and we could spell that out in the slide where we have region West, where we would replicate, and you can bring a third-party product or the database technology to replicate the production system, the DR. And with those availability zones, what that's showing is we can then have that data replicated on an automatic basis when we're going to the S3. So we'll actually see this. I should probably show that in the next slide here. And that's to give you an example here. Let's start with one. What AWS has is the auto recovery feature, and this is a flag that you can turn on in any instance. And what that provides is when you have that instance would go down, it would automatically start another instance. So within minutes, you would have another system recovered. So it's not a sharing memory or application HA setup. It's an HA of when a physical or a virtual system fails, the other virtual system will start. So there will be an outage in this scenario with SAP, and there's some more sophisticated options we can bring to bear with DR, with HA. We can bring that to bear on the application level. Yet for this scenario, the free offering that you just tag the auto recovery at the instance will automatically bring the instance up into this other EC2 region, which you're showing here. We can also then, for the EBS volumes, we take backups, we copy those to the S3 storage, and that will then replicate and offsite that data. So again, you have that very resilient storage and very low cost where you can put your backups for those systems. And that's going to go then cross-region to you're going to 4. And then lastly, if you wanted to restore it, you could put another region and bring that system up. So this is built in. These are all standard features within AWS, no additional third-party products, no additional other offerings that you have to build with scripts yourself. So very powerful feature set just from the base solution. And this is a better example of how we would set up. So that first slide where I was showing DR, we'd actually have DR set up in a separate region. So in this example, you have the East region is where you'd have the production landscape, and then you would have DR set up in the West. So for example, this might be Virginia on East for the production landscape, and West would be California or Oregon. So in this scenario, what we have, you can see in the dashed circles here, those boxes, we'd have that production landscape. And we see the EBS storage being shared. So when that ECC system would go down, it would automatically get restarted on that auto recovery instance. So when that fails, it would automatically come up because the storage is shared. You would have an outage of a couple minutes. That's the HA scenario. For DR, we're going to have a replication of DR, and that synchronization point could be down even less than a minute. It's really dependent upon the speed of your networking between those two data centers. And being this is AWS, you can get amazing throughput. So we've seen down to seconds to having replication capabilities of having those logs shipped over and having that DR system current. And what we have here is we can take advantage of the AWS cloud where we can size that target system very small. We call that a pilot light. And you would only launch a larger instance when either you're going to do a test or you could even copy the system to create a prod copy, which is something that's a very nice feature. Or if you actually had DR event where you had to start the system in the DR region, you would bring this up in a larger instance. So this slide basically is talking to business continuity with both the HA and the DR capabilities. Going to just spend a few minutes on this. We have a separate webinar that talks just about migrations, so we won't spend much time on it. But the important part to think about when bringing workload into AWS on HANA is, or I should say more in general, when we're talking about HANA, this is a perfect opportunity to think about moving that workload into the cloud, into AWS. And you can see that represented on the left side where we have the business suite right now in any combination of OS and DB. And we're seeing where SAP is narrowing its support and it's focusing, on a Linux OS to support HANA, and 99% of the market now is SUSE OS for HANA. So we're starting to see that narrow in that second tier, and then also the jump then to go to S4 once a customer is on HANA. So there's an iterative. You could take a jump where you go from any OS and DB on Business Suite and then jump to HANA. On Linux, and then there's another jump to possibly go to cloud with S4. The possibility, what we're representing here is instead of doing multiple hops, we could also do this in one hop through the technology SAP provides for migration. We have like I said, we have a webinar that talks just to this topic, and we've built a product that automates this capability and improves the migration to HANA. And that's encourage you to look that up if you have more questions on that. The big message when we talk to customers looking to go to HANA and S4HANA is that journey for each customer is going to be unique. And so it's really important to understand if it's, possibly maybe the upgrade migration is not the best approach, maybe even a new implementation. So that's something that customers are looking at, and they're looking to see what the S4HANA, it's going to be a new schema. How is that going to map with current functionality? The other thing I'll mention is that we're seeing is interest that for companies that are already on HANA, they're going to do an add-on S4. So they're not changing the schema so much. They're adding on the S4 simple finance capabilities and keeping the HANA repository live. So they're actually adding to their footprint. So they have HANA plus S4. So that's another option we see companies looking at right now for migration. Let's talk about the typical use cases here. So like I mentioned at the top of the call, let's start maybe in the middle here, these non-production instances. This is where life started with SAP on AWS. And before the production certification came, we focused a lot of our attention there. And that's how we moved companies into AWS initially. We started with looking at sandbox systems. Let's get a copy of production. And you can see how it's going to run on AWS in the cloud. And a lot of things it's going to be vastly different. We got to make sure we validate printing and transports. And matter of fact, this is one of the big areas that had a lot of focus around the SAP certification is around the operations aspect. How is it going to be different working in the cloud? So we actually stood up a test environment in our on-premise, in our data center to have a hybrid approach to have systems in AWS talk to our test systems in our on-premise data center. And so that was a big focus area. Ended up obviously working extremely well. And so these use cases where it started with a sandbox, let's move our dev system in there, it ultimately then moved to putting quality and production in there also. It's a very good use case. The very nice feature with doing non-prod in the cloud is it's very easy to bring those systems up and down. So you know, the development sandbox, certainly, maybe even quality can only be up or needs to be up 8 hours a day. So it is something that we can automate to bring those systems up as needed or on an on-demand basis. So you can save on the compute resources that are needed to support those systems. So then after the non-production instances were tested out, one of the other big areas that we saw a lot of interest is with disaster recovery, which I mentioned previously, that the native features in AWS Cloud suit disaster recovery extremely well, where we can have this pilot light system as a target to receive all the replication, database logs, and file system sync. And it suits itself very well for putting DR into the cloud, so we can spin up copies very quickly. And one of the hidden features of doing the disaster recovery in the cloud is that you can easily make these prod copies, which people can use for regression testing, doing upgrade testing, or new prototypes of a solution, for example, on ECC or BI. So it's been a hidden benefit, but that was another big enabler for SAP functionality in the cloud is the DR. Once the SAP certification came for production, then we started seeing full workloads going, full landscapes into the cloud. Again, the big advantage here is you can pay for exactly what you use. So all the advantages that we talked about with non-production. So if you want to bring it up only certain hours a day for the non-prod systems, you get that value for the cost savings. But as well as you're not paying these tremendous infrastructure costs to buy servers, millions of dollars of servers to buy 40 servers and then put VM on it and provision your landscape. And you're sizing it for workload that you might hit in 5 years from now. With the AWS Cloud, you can now size it for the workload you need today, and then you bring down the instance, and you can add a different instance type that has more RAM or CPU, and you can run it for the workload that you'll need, for the next month. So you can right size your workload resources. And then lastly, we talked about this already, is the HANA, and it's that the announcement at Sapphire was a watershed moment, I think, for HANA in the cloud. Is now we can take the largest workloads and put them in AWS. So there's some really good information out there about it's more complicated, how you take a multi-tenant HANA system and you move it to X1. Some really good information that's starting, seeing a lot of interest from customers on how that can be done. So in summary, the production landscape, you can reduce the cost operations in the on-demand scalability. The HANA now is available for proof of concept. It's production ready. The non-production instances, the on-demand, test drive, and low cost. And then finally, with the disaster recovery, we have the scalable on-demand, and it's the high ROI, where you can build it and use it in a very small pilot light instance. All right. So as we mentioned, a lot of the content we talked about here, this will summarize, I think, quite well. So with the efficiency gains, if you talk about the traditional on-premise model, what it's been up to now without AWS Cloud, it's these areas around change management, the commitment to having those resources and the provisioning are a lot longer and 100% cost throughout the life of that project or use, whereas in the AWS it's quite different. So to talk about change management, we can think about just adding any kind of resource change for that instance. And as I mentioned, we may have an instance or a requirement for HANA today, which is only 226 gig, where we can size the system. It's going to be fine. We actually have a customer, which we'll talk about in one of the case studies, that they went live with business objects on AWS, and they're now outgrowing the 226 size that they originally had. So obviously we want to architect and design it. That's part of the solution we provide them. Yet the actual mechanics to make the change is going to be bringing down the instance and now starting with an X1 instance type. So instead of us going to buy RAM or a new server, waiting for the delays just to get the hardware provisioned and on site and all the purchase up front, we can now enable this within minutes to actually do the change. And that goes with all the networking capabilities. I didn't talk much about the networking on the previous slides, but all of the physical routers and switches and firewalls are all represented virtually within the VPC capabilities. So all those change management to scale up You don't have to go and provision a new port. It's all done virtually. So tremendous cost and time savings there. We talked about the commitment. So instead of buying 60 servers and having them sit for 5 years at that, to be able to provide the capabilities of workload in 5 years, you're paying all up front and you're going to have that on the floor for 5 years, even when you don't need all of it. The commitment in AWS, you can use it as you need it, and you can even stop the services. As long as you keep the storage, you keep the systems in persistent storage, you can stop them, quiesce them, and then start them again when you need them. And then lastly, to wrap it up with the provisioning, that's the quick provisioning around the AMIs, which are the Amazon Machine Images. So you can quickly get an image of running HANA on SUSE and spin it up within a couple minutes, instead of having a certified appliance, which will take weeks to set up, to turn on and get in the data center. As well as the other very nice enabler is called CloudFormation. And if you've never seen a demo of this, I would encourage you to see this from AWS. For example, one of the first memories when I got introduced to AWS was showing them how you could create a Citrix farm in a few minutes. And in this, for us to do this in the past has been weeks, if not months of effort to set up, the load balancers and get all the application servers for Citrix set up and provision the users. It's hundreds of hours, and they showed within CloudFormation with the scripting capabilities to create this within a few minutes. And that same technology has been now applied to HANA, so you can provision an environment for a full landscape with the CloudFormation. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to look at that. It's extremely powerful. So again, what I mentioned before about if we look at the full stack, you can think from bottom up, this is all the efficiency gains on each level. So when you talk about the AWS cloud and what it provides, we saw those categories where you have the compute, the storage, the networking, and security. That's brought to bear for the whole layer. So it's a natural fit with SAP for all the capabilities, requirements for these other areas of OS patching. We just got a big announcement from SUSE at Sapphire where they can do live patching now for HANA. So you can do the OS patching without rebooting the OS. So it's a huge enabler where you'll still want to take outages in SAP, to do kernel patching and to do support package patching, obviously, to keep that current. Yet the OS patching is one huge less requirement for time that we want to do on a quarterly basis. So very natural fit with AWS and SUSE, enabling to keep the systems current on patching and secure. And then we go up, the backups and DR, the efficiencies around the S3 and the EBS IOPS. Make sure we have very cost-effective way to store the data for backups, and also how to do replication with the AZs with DR. And then the last piece is these are all areas that we've, over the years, have built our services around with the OS monitoring, capacity planning, monitoring, the base administration. Those are our managed services, which are subscription. But it naturally fits within the cloud model, where we can do it on a on-demand basis. So we mentioned these already for the categories, production landscapes, no CapEx, no pay upfront, you pay when you go. Also the HANA, so again, we can scale up. You can start small, start at 226 or even smaller, and scale that up as you need to 2 terabytes. And then with multi-tenant HANA, which is available as of support package 8, you can now put multiple HANA systems in there. So instead of having multiple instances in AWS, you could run 2, 3, or 4 HANA systems in that same instance for a very good cost savings. And then, as we mentioned, all the cost savings with the non-prod systems to keep those down when they're not in use. So on average, we've seen, for our customer savings, 50% over a 3-year period. So huge opportunity for cost savings. So let's jump into the success stories, some of the good stuff, real advantages, real return on investment here for a bunch of customers that are in AWS. So the first one we have is a high-end movie theater chain. They're based in the U.S. They're actually based in California. They have theaters around the country. The key differentiator here is with that key deployment, a very fast deployment around AWS. They're able to do the end-to-end project within 16 weeks, which just to procure hardware in the past could take a month at that time in a good case scenario. So end-to-end, start from implementation to go live was 16 weeks. And that was done with a functional partner that we work a lot with, Savannah. So encourage you, if you want more information on that, we can get you that one. The next one, Ferrara, is you'll recognize from Lemonheads. That's the company that owns the Lemonhead candy, as well as they have a bunch of other candy families. They run business objects on HANA. They've been running HANA for a couple of years now in AWS. They're looking at actually going to a larger instance size. There's a case study actually you can see there in the link. And then MB Coatings, they were actually one of our proof of concept companies that did FlexBridge. This is our product for migration. Very good scenario here where they took a ECC system running on Windows Oracle, and that was migrated over the internet, over a VPN connection, over to the HANA cloud on AWS. I should say HANA running on the AWS cloud. That was done in 1 week, the end-to-end migration, and that we got the downtime down to 3 hours using FlexBridge. The other case study I'll point you to, there's actually a video on YouTube, and there's a case study on the AWS website, is Merrifield Garden Centers. They're a perfect example of running the on-demand model. They actually have a large percentage of their business runs in the month of May and April. So they bring up additional app servers on demand when they need them for their peak workload. And then we have Midwest Tape. They've been on HANA, or I'm sorry, they've been on AWS for I think 2 or 3 years now, set up with DR. So they have the capabilities where they can do the testing at any time, as well as doing prod copies for regression testing. We have Tableau, which is a very, very popular mobile application for analytics. They've been running in AWS for many, many years, doing the BI. Then we have a few other examples. All these are DR scenario setup, sampling, so go out of chemicals. There's a case study for them. K-Switch, which is the footwear apparel company. And then VisCase, which does sausage casings. And the interesting thing about VisCase is they have a quite older version of SAP, which has been set up for DR. Before, they have Oracle, and in that version of 9 of Oracle, they don't even support DR. So it shows even the toughest technical requirements, we can set up DR on AWS and make it work quite well. And lastly, I'll mention GolfMark. GolfMark has been on AWS for, I think, about a year now, and they've achieved tremendous cost savings with going to AWS and using our managed services. So very good success story there. There's one that's coming out, I believe, soon on the AWS website. And lastly, Harvey Building Products. They're on the East Coast. They do DR with us, and they have a very, very large DB2 system. So it shows even in the heaviest workloads, we can set up DR in the cloud, and it works fantastic well. So I'll encourage you to take advantage of our proof of concept. It's going for another 2 days. And this is brought to you by SUSE and Amazon Web Services and Protera. And with that, we have the cloud hardware, or the services, as well as the migration assessment, the migration itself, and the operations for 60 days is fully covered. It is a bring your own license. If that proves to be an issue and you really want to kick the tires on HANA but don't have a license yet, we'll see if we can work something out. I'll turn it back to you, Christian.
Hey, thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Perfect timing. So we have a few more minutes for a few questions here. On the slide on the screen here, I want just to add a quick point. Yeah, this offer, this proof of concept offer is valid until June 30th. On demand, for those of you interested, please reach out to us so we can extend that period beyond June 30th. Thought I would just clarify that. Yeah, we have one question that came up a couple of times in different variations. Pat, you mentioned a couple of times the migration to HANA, and the question was, or the questions I should say, if I summarize them, was mostly around what kind of data compression have we seen in terms of the size of the initial database versus the HANA database, knowing that some of the viewers here mentioned databases 5 terabyte and how would that shrink and would that fit into an X1 instance?
Yeah, Yeah, we've seen on the, to vary between, I'd say between 30 and 40% is what we've noticed for a system that is already compressed. So those are examples of systems that we manage. So there might be, it might be, if it's non-compressed, the savings might be closer to 30%, but if it's already compressed, I would say 40% at minimum. It would be an expectation that you could size it with. So I think, if you have up to a 5 terabyte ECC system, that would fit within a 2 terabyte HANA system on AWS without a problem, without doing any archiving or any other remediation today.
And yeah, and the other questions were around for testing HANA on AWS, but you mentioned that it's a bring your own license model. So in the case the customer doesn't have the license, we would be able to provide some test licenses, right?
That's right. Yep, it will do our very best to. There's different types of licenses that AWS provides free. There's I believe a BI license they offer for free for trial. So depending upon what type of system, even if it's ECC, we can see if we can work something out with SAP for a trial. So we don't want that to be a limitation to get a company to try it.
Perfect, that's good news. So we have a solution for that. Another question that came up at the beginning of the presentation was about encryption. That was around when you presented the slides about the AWS services. Yeah. The question was about encryption, data at rest, and data in transit.
Good questions. I would have to revert to how it's stored on the database. It is certainly capable in HANA. It's going to be, there's some options on how it's done. So it's certainly an option to do this. We have a customer that has that enabled in AWS. So that's certainly a feature. There's some ways that we can do it. So not to be vague, but it's certainly capable. I can think of 2 ways you can do it as far as the implementation. That's for the data at rest. For the encryption of the data for transfer, part of SAP's requirements is to have a VPC. So any of the communications between the customer and the AWS cloud are going to be encrypted with a VPN tunnel at minimum. So that part would be secure and encrypted for certain. So to answer the question succinctly, there's options on how you do the data at rest encryption, and then for the encryption for the data traffic, it's required as part of SAP's requirements, certifications for AWS.
Perfect. Yeah, and please feel free to reach out. I'm talking to the viewers here. If you have some additional questions on that topic, we can certainly help clarify that point. If you have more specific compliance requirements you want to discuss. At this point, Pat, I have no other questions here. So I will conclude this webinar for today here. So Patrick, thank you so much for this great presentation today, as always. Thank you all of you for attending this presentation. Contact details for Patrick and myself on the last slide here. At the bottom of the slide, you have also a link that will point you to our main page where you will find the dive-in webinars on specific topics. We typically run 1, 2, sometimes 3 webinars per month. Yeah, check this page. Frequently you will find probably interesting topics, and I might want to attend future webinars. All of you will receive a copy of today's presentation, as well as a link to the recording. So for those of you interested in sharing this information internally, please feel free to do so. So thank you to all of you for for attending the webinar today. Patrick, thank you again for the great presentation. Thank you to all of you, and this concludes the session for today. Thank you.
Everyone.